My name is Kathleen Soriano. I was the curator of the Anselm Kiefer retrospective at the Royal Academy of Arts in 2014. I'm here today to tell you a little bit about this wonderful painting. Anselm Kiefer was born in 1945, at the very end of the Second World War, in a small town called Donau-Eschingen, on the banks of the River Rhine, close to the borders of Switzerland and France. And right from the very start, Anselm considered himself to be an artist. He knew he was an artist. And I think he's gone on today to show us that he's probably one of our greatest living artists. Anselm's known largely for his work that deals with issues around the Second World War and reclaiming the culture of Germany. But his work is multifaceted, and another area that we look at an awful lot in his work is around religion and Kabbalah. For Anselm, he's only interested in the big questions in life. What am I here to do? How did I come to be here? How can I connect with this greater being, this greater God? So for him, painting, making art, is all about trying to find the answers to those questions. He came to Kabbalah, having been born a Roman Catholic and raised a Roman Catholic, he came to Kabbalah when he visited Jerusalem in 1984. And he was looking out the window of his hotel at the Mount of Olives that was behind, and it sort of evoked a memory in him of his childhood, where one of his family relatives lived behind a mountain that was also called the Mount of Olives. And that, he says, gave him a shock. And that shock provoked him to make painting. And Anselm has often said that it's the shock that inspires him to carry on. Now, with his painting, the materials and the way in which he starts to create the works are very important. He nearly always begins with photographs. And if you look at the side of this work, you'll see that there are a series of panels of photographs that have been laid underneath this painting. Then on top, he starts to apply the paint and the other materials that he mixes in with the paint, be it ash or shellac or dust from the studio. In this work, we see him contemplating the writings of Isaac Luria, the Spanish 16th century philosopher, who really defined his notion of the mysticism of Kabbalah. And you'll see the text at the top of the painting, which is defining those basic elements that Luria defined, the Sephiroth, the 10 elements. At the top, you have the divine. Below that, you have intellect. The next section looks at the moral. Below that, you have material. And right at the bottom, the 10th element is Malkut, mother, the physical kingdom, the place where we are. So for Anselm, this work is also about connecting heaven and earth. That's one of the things that's fascinated him in his study. He also believes that us as the viewer, we ought to work very hard to understand art. It shouldn't be an easy thing. Art should actually be something that makes you scratch your head. And certainly, in a painting like this, it's full of meaning and full of context and can really make you scratch your head an awful lot. Because Kiefer also likes to complicate things by having a rather cyclical view of history and a cyclical view of literature and how everything is intertwined. So in this one painting, you can actually find almost every single element, theory, theme that you'll find in nearly any Anselm Kiefer piece of work. So the minute you start to deconstruct the painting, you start to find your ways into the thinking that is behind Anselm Kiefer's work. And Die Schechina is really the notion of the transformative power of God. And in many ways it is a representation of the Holy Spirit, the presence of God. Now, Kiefer has always been fascinated about this connection between heaven and earth, the relationship between the microcosm and the macrocosm, and that exists in many of his works that you'll see. Schechina, though, is also a very feminine word. It's associated with the notion of the Sabbath bride. And if you look at the figure that's been represented here, it's almost as if she's wearing a wedding dress. But Schechina's also got this slightly sort of evil tone to it as well, as does the figure of Lilith, which Anselm Kiefer represents many, many times in works that he produces. But Lilith is also associated very closely with artists. And one of the reasons is that she's also associated with the material of lead. Now, lead is very important to Anselm Kiefer, and you'll see the presence of it here at various points in the painting. He talks about lead being the material that's closest to us. He's been fascinated by it all his life and has used it in much of the work that he produces. Lead is also associated with alchemy, another one of Anselm Kiefer's passionate interests, the notion of turning base metals into gold. And when Kiefer is using these different materials in his work, what he says he's really trying to do is to extract the spirit of those materials. So you're not just looking at the object itself, you're also looking at the spirit of the material too. The cage that you see in the centre, which represents the trap, has a number of lead pieces hanging down from it with numbered tags. Now, we're familiar with numbered tags in many of the star constellation paintings that Kiefer has produced, but here they're numbered from 1 to 7, as indeed are the sunflowers below it. And those numberings are a direct reference to the 7 heavenly palaces which are represented in Kabbalah, and which the soul travels to on its way to reach the divine force. And then with the sunflowers in the bottom section of the painting, we have another very important reference for Kiefer. Kiefer was a huge fan, on a very basic level, a huge fan of Vincent van Gogh from a very young age. In fact, he won a prize at the age of 16 for writing an essay which was published in a German newspaper on Van Gogh. And he even went on a pilgrimage to some of the places where Van Gogh had lived when he was younger. But ultimately, in 1992, he moved to the south of France in Barjac, and this fantastic 75-acre estate where he's now gone on to build over 50 buildings and tunnels and towers, and has really produced a Gesamtkunstwerk on this estate. But when he first arrived, he obtained some seeds of sunflowers from Japan and planted them, and these sunflowers grew 7 meters tall, and he would lie in these fields with these large heads looking down on him. And there are a number of paintings called Orders of the Night which reflect on that particular theme, and you see the self-portrait of him lying in the base. But when he would look into the heads of those blackened flowers, he would think about Robert Flood, the 16th century English physician, who'd written on a theory of how every plant on Earth is directly connected to a specific star in the sky. So here again we see Kiefer finding theories that connect us and God, connect the earthly with the divine. So he's constantly looking for in his work. Of course, the other direct reference that the sunflowers have are to do with life, death, and rebirth and resurrection. And the flowers that would have died, but the seeds within that contain that new life. And certainly the material of ash, which is the final material, which I'm pretty confident is present in the paint, and would have been rubbed into the paint in the mixture that is on the canvas. That is also the ultimate material that has the fertility to be reborn. So Kiefer has always been fascinated by the notion of the connections between heaven and earth. And certainly on this work, what we see is a movement between the celestial and the earthly. And it really needs to be read rather like a tree with the roots at the top flowing into the branches here at the bottom. And there are some direct references here also to Jacob's ladder and the way in which we would move through the different phases of our life in order to improve ourselves until we reached the ultimate goal. And certainly you could draw parallels also with alchemy and the way in which he would have considered to be searching for enlightenment. The white figure that you see here is a direct allusion to a series of works that Kiefer produced called The Women of Antiquity. Normally, in sculptural format, they were plaster models of these dresses cast without a head, and often with strange objects, either wrapped up pieces of barbed wire, or bushes, or even the melancholic polyhedron from the Dürer engraving from 1514, Melancholia. And the role of nature is very important in the making of Anselm Kiefer's work. This would have been made in Barjac, out on the estate, it's very likely that it would have sat out in the sunlight and the rain. And he has a very physical relationship with the canvas. It's not beyond him to sort of hit it with rocks or throw things at it or attack it with a blowtorch. And here at the centre, it's almost, you can feel him physically sort of attacking the canvas.